My name's Robbie Luckett. I'm professor of history and director of the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University. Today is August the 19th, 2021. It is approximately 10:38 a.m. I am joined by T. Jones from the National Civil Rights Museum. For the record, T, will you state your full name and spell it?
Yes, so my full name is Tsitsi, T-S-I-T-S-I, Jones, J-O-N-E-S.
And you go by T though, correct?
I go by T, yes, make life easier.
And is that T-E-E? Is that how you spell it?
Correct.
Do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
So let's begin with some biographical information and background information on you. Can you tell us a little bit about where and when you were born, your family, how you grew up, your educational background, those kinds of things?
Absolutely. So I was born in Mutare, Zimbabwe. It was Rhodesia back then, but Rhodesia gained its independence in 1980. And I was born, you want the year I was born to? I was born
if you're willing to share it, we would be happy to have that information. It's not required. You can feel free to not answer any questions you don't want to answer.
Well, anyway, I was born in 1969, but I grew up in Harare, Zimbabwe, which is the capital of Zimbabwe, and I left there when I was 17 to come to the United States.
Can you tell us about your family and how you grew up and life in Zimbabwe and what brought you to the United States at 17?
Absolutely. So my parents were United Methodists, and my dad was actually a United Methodist minister later in life after the kids all finished graduate school. Actually, my dad and I ended up in grad school at the same time later. But my dad was educated in Omaha, Lincoln, Nebraska, back in the early 60s. And it was all through the United Methodist Church and relationship with missionaries. So he always had great respect for the American type of education. Anyway, so I went from kindergarten to the end of high school. I went to a Dominican convent school in Harare, which ironically back then I was taught by Zimbabwean teachers as well as German nuns. So we had it was a good, strict education, but yet it was structured. And, in a lot of ways, it was actually good for me because I needed structure. And my passion for math and algebra actually came from one of the German nuns back then. And so anyway, after let me tell you a little bit about my family. So my dad, he received an undergraduate degree in biology and geography, and he had a master's in geography. And for a long time, he worked in Zimbabwe for the Ministry of Education. And really, I think a lot of that was because that would pay the bills. But once my sister, my brother, and I graduated from college, he went back and actually went to seminary to become a United Methodist minister. So when I was 17, I came to college, to Central Methodist University in Fayette, Missouri, where I had a double major in business and accounting with a minor in mathematics as well. And then I went to University of Central Missouri for my master's in business administration. And what else? Oh, where do I live now? I live in Arlington, Tennessee, which is just right outside of Memphis.
Now, I know that you obviously work at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. What was your professional experience before you came to the museum field, if any?
So I was more a for-profit corporate accounting person, and that was actually what I thought I would always do. I worked for several different companies, but the last ones, I guess the last 10 years before I came to the National Civil Rights Museum, I worked for different poultry companies. So I worked for Tyson Foods, and then I worked for ConAgra Poultry and Pilgrim's Pride. And when I left Pilgrim's to relocate to Memphis, I was a controller over in Atlanta.
And what led you to the museum field, the museum work?
It really just happened. Beverly Robertson, who was the former president of the National Civil Rights Museum, somebody gave her my resume and she reached out to talk to me back in 2006. And it's interesting that it was actually a very informal, unplanned interview that I had with Beverly at the beginning. And I'll always respect her for, you know, we were at IHOP, believe it or not, when we had my first interview. And I had come to Memphis not knowing and not prepared for an interview, but she knew I was in town and really just wanted to talk to me because she had looked at my resume. And so we had an in-depth conversation, and she was really outlining some of the opportunities that the National Civil Rights Museum was having at the time in the finance area, in retail, to do with like inventories and just, you know, audits and just different challenges they were having at the time. And so she really dug deep to really understand what my experience was. Because when I was talking to Beverly, I told her, hey, my very first job out of college was at a nonprofit for a few years, but I hadn't been in a nonprofit for so long. But as we were talking, you know, the issues they were having were really to do with a lot of things that, you know, happen in nonprofits. And so, and my mindset up until this day, when I'm looking at the museum, yes, we are a nonprofit, but I do really just have that mindset of we are a business, and my job is to make sure that the museum still exists way past when I leave, you know, when I leave the museum. And just to talk to you about some of the things we really worked on, and, you know, see as great accomplishments were for the museum was operating at a deficit, and close to the end of the fiscal year in our slow period, we had to tap into our line of credit that we had. And so I'm one of those people who does not believe in unnecessary debt. I'm extremely conservative when it comes to that. And so we worked very hard to, you know, streamline and push to increase revenue, and really looked at internal controls, especially like in some of our revenue generating areas. And we did end up not even tapping into the line of credit within like the first 2 years after I had arrived at the museum. And do you want me to just kind of talk you through some of my experiences at the museum?
Well, yeah, I'm interested if we could back up a second. So you met Beverly for the interview at IHOP. Did she offer you a job there on the spot? What was your initial appointment? Are you in the same job you're in now? How did that go?
So, hey, Beverly and I joke about this all the time because I always tell Beverly, okay, Bev, you are the only person who's going to, hire your finance director when she's dressed in a denim mini skirt and a t-shirt with who knows what it had on it. But it was funny because I just come from Querétaro, Mexico, where I had been for 2 weeks with my other job, and I came to Memphis. And so I was not prepared for the interview at all. But no, she did not formally offer me the position immediately, but I had a very good feeling about it. She did invite me to come back to Memphis to actually, she didn't interview me then because she was done, but to meet with a few members of her senior team, as well as some board members, including the CEO of AutoZone, and then the Hyde Family Foundation, and some of our board members who are on the board. So she did actually have me interview with, like Bill Rhodes with AutoZone, used to be a CPA with Ernst & Young before he became president and chairman of the board of AutoZone. So he had a very good idea. And then I also interviewed with a couple other board members with finance or accounting backgrounds.
And so you were hired in what year was that?
It was in 2006.
And your official title was then CFO?
Finance director when I started. I'm chief financial officer now.
And what has your journey since then been like at the National Civil Rights Museum in those positions?
Well, I have really seen the National Civil Rights Museum grow during the whole time I have been here, from a budget of $4 million up to a budget of $9 to $10 million, operating with a line of credit to where we closed it entirely because we did not need it anymore. Seeing retail going from around $450,000 for our retail museum store to, in some busy years, actually going to over gross revenue of over $2 million. And then the renovation, we had a renovation. And I remember when I first started in 2006, the conversation was about renovating the Lorraine Motel, and it was going to be about a $5 million renovation, to where at the end it became a $27.5 million renovation with some money left over for the endowment as well. And then just over the years, and I know I drive my colleagues crazy because I always feel like we need to save some money for a rainy day. Bill Rhodes actually is also our treasurer on our board, and we actually laughed about this last year after COVID hit, because we went back and forth about an operating reserve. And we were all in agreement that we needed an operating reserve. And, Bill thought, 3 months of operating reserve would be good. And, I was like, we need 6 months. But anyway, we went back and forth. And fortunately, even when COVID hit, we have an operating reserve of about $2 million. And also the endowment, the museum did not have an endowment. So part of our capital campaign for the Lorraine renovation was also seeding that endowment, which was, part of Beverly Robertson's vision. And so we were able to do that as well. But what we ended up doing with it is also really focusing on a quasi endowment or board endowment. So it's not really restricted, from a donor standpoint. But I did fight hard to make sure we had that piece of it. And so when you look at between our endowment and the quasi endowment, we do have 17 million now in the endowment. So that, if there's one big accomplishment I feel like I was a part of, that would be it. Of course, it also meant trying not to spend as much. I am rather conservative when it comes to spending, but it also gave us peace of mind, when COVID hit and when we are looking into the future, to know that the museum is in a good place. We are definitely not where I want us to be, but we are absolutely going in the right direction.
Can you explain an endowment and what that means for your museum, and how an endowment supports the work of the National Civil Rights Museum? I'm not sure everybody actually, they may know the word endowment, but they're not entirely aware of what that actually means and how it supports the work you do.
So the way an endowment works is it's money that you put into some investments, and you have to really manage it. And it takes a lot of decision making to decide how the money should be invested and how the museum wants, how conservative or aggressive the organization wants to be in where the money is invested. And we have a percentage in our fixed investments, and then we have some corporate bonds and stocks. And so it's a diverse portfolio, which I'm fortunate enough to have some finance committee members who work with me to make sure that we are being good stewards of the museum's money. But the way the endowment works is the money goes in, and then income from the endowment goes towards museum operations or programming. So it all depends on how the donor designates that the income from the endowment should be spent. But the corpus, which is, the principal, should never be spent. So we have $1 million in a collections endowment. Then we also have one endowment fund that we received from the NEH, I think it is. Yes. And it was a 3-to-1 match. And so they gave us $750,000. So that's really where it started, because Beverly Robertson and Beverly Sakawa in development worked hard to get that piece of it. And then we had to get the 3-to-1 match. At the same time, we were funding the renovation of the Lorraine. And at the end of the day, a lot of people honored Beverly. And so we ended up actually naming that fund the NEH/ Beverly Robertson Endowment, and it goes to educational programming, especially for college and grade school children. And so we leave the corpus intact, and we can spend the income. Then the third one I was talking about is the quasi-endowment. We call that the BDEF, which is like the board designated endowment fund. And that is actually not a formal endowment, because it was not donated by a specific donor specifically for an endowment. But this is money that we are taking, any excess money that the museum would have, that we are taking and we are putting, and we treat it as an endowment fund as well. So we do not touch the corpus of that fund, or we have not yet. but we are able, when needed, to use the income off of it as the need arises. And we actually created a spending policy that goes along with it. And in that spending policy, you know, I'm blessed to have a great finance committee. So we go back and forth, and I'm even more conservative on some things than they are, because I know how hard it is to build that money. So I don't want to spend unless we absolutely have to. So, you know, I was pushing for the board would have to vote 80-20 in order to spend that. Of course, we ended up going to a supermajority, which is really 66 2/3. So in order to spend money in that quasi-endowment, it has got to be an absolute need. And the board would have to have a meeting and have a 66 2/3 majority of the whole board in order to touch it. Fortunately, we have not had the need to spend, you know, those funds.
I'm glad you mentioned the policy part of it, because I was going to ask you about the various policies that govern the work that you do, and not just the endowment, which thanks for that explanation and this understanding that you have a corpus, a large body of money that is invested in various ways, probably fairly conservatively, I would guess, because you're not going to put all of that in equity, all of that in stocks where you might lose large.
Spread it out.
You spread it out. But the people who give to the endowment may not designate that money as unrestricted that could be used for anything for the museum, but may in fact give you money specifically for education programming. And the each year, I guess, the money that is made from the endowment in terms of growth can be used for specifically those purposes. But I'm guessing you must have some part of it that's unrestricted as well, that's able to be used for operating costs.
Yes, we do have a fourth fund, which we just call the EF, which is just an endowment fund, and that one is not restricted. So, and I'm very interested in growing that piece of it, because as I see what some of the development work, sometimes I see that there is a challenge in receiving unrestricted funds for general operations. And so whenever we do receive endowment funds that are not restricted, that's where it goes, so that when we need it for general operations, we could get it out of that fund if the need ever arose. But the other thing I always urge, and really, again, I am for-profit minded more than I am nonprofit minded. So one of the things I always emphasize as well is, as you know, as an organization or a museum, or regardless of what kind of organization it is, you know, depending, you have good years where you generate a lot of revenue. So for example, with us, we renovated the Lorraine and reopened in 2014. At that time, it was a brand new museum. Guess what? Our visitors went from 100 and something thousand to 330,000. We generated a lot of operating revenue. And so some of that revenue is how we really started building up the board endowment. And so instead of then saying, okay, we have this extra money in our, we have income from the collections endowment that we need to spend, I would rather, spend it out of the money we have in operations. It's the same money. It's just really moving from A to B, but making sure then that we move, the income that's restricted from the collections and moving it into the unrestricted, so that we're accounting for it correctly and building up the unrestricted endowment while not actually taking your money out of your investments if you don't have to.
Can you explain the planning that goes into your budget process? Because so we've talked about the endowment, but now we're talking about revenue that's generated by visitors who are coming into your doors. And so just kind of a broad, high level overview of how you plan a budget for a museum as big as yours and the number of visitors that you have that come in.
It's teamwork. It is teamwork. It's a lot of forecasting. And, these last 2 years, my budget has been off drastically because of COVID. Fortunately, it was actually for the better. We actually were more conservative and it ended up being much better than we expected. But it is really teamwork where the senior team sits down and really plans what we want to do in the next fiscal year, or maybe even in the next couple of fiscal years, in terms of programming, events, etc., so that we have a good idea of how much money we need for that. And then, we project out based on history. So I look a lot at the visitors we've had previously, and we usually always plan for growth. But one of the issues we were actually coming into was, with growth, we have limited capacity. Our museum is only as big as it's going to get. And so, I want more people to come, it's more revenue. But now we are trying to creatively figure out how do we get people to come on other days of the week, as opposed to everybody coming on Saturdays in July, which is our busiest time of the year. So we have a lot of discussions and creative thinking of how can we maximize the earned income as well as our contributions. And once we have a good idea about that, then we look at, our staffing, and if we have increased staffing needs for the next fiscal year, we look at our expenses and, just the overall operations of the museum and all the programming. And we actually have all our different departments that we have here. Each department is actually responsible for creating and being responsible for their own budget. Now, if it's outrageous, we go back and forth several times and make some cuts and make some changes. But overall, I seldom, I think only because of COVID, was maybe the first time since 2008 that we've actually planned to have a deficit. Otherwise, I don't believe in zero budgets. I don't even know what that means. Or nonprofit, that means you need to budget zero. No, that is not it at all. You always want to make sure that you are budgeting a bottom line that, has, depending on your size, I believe at least 100 to 200,000 in profit, because you don't know what will happen. Something might not work out, or you may end up, being even more favorable than you planned. But anyway, so that's really what goes in it. So we run a lot of assumptions, different scenarios, and then we create our budget, and then I cover it with our finance committee, a set of board members who are on our finance committee. And inadvertently, because a lot of those folks are very business-minded as well, and they usually will send it back and they'll notice some things that they want us to really think about, and we work on it and then eventually have a budget with a profit. And I'll tell you, one thing that we have done is, if we end up favorable at the end of the fiscal year, we pull some of that money and put it into our board designated endowment, into that unrestricted endowment, because you are not always going to have all good years. You need a cushion for when you need it.
I'm glad that you mentioned the whole nonprofit thing, because I think that there is a misconception that nonprofits either lose money or break even every year, and that's in fact should not be the perspective of nonprofits and museums, because you need revenue, you need to be able to generate income so that you can make the work you do.
And absolutely, a nonprofit is a business and it is a going concern. And one of the things, even in auditing, that you look at is you need to make sure that your auditors and everybody can absolutely certify that we are a going concern, that we are not hanging on a thread. And if you're always either operating at a loss or barely breaking even, when a crisis comes, you are not prepared, and it causes more headaches than what is necessary. And so I do believe that you need to be as conservative as you can be. But, while at the same time, I mean, you have to pay staff well, because otherwise you lose staff. You have to have good security, good operations all the way around, and you need to have excellent programming. And so, of course, my best friend is the development team, because they are the folks that can make my life a whole lot easier, thank goodness. And I am excited about, the new president, and even the president we had before Terry and the president we have now. Our new National Civil Rights Museum president is Dr. Russell Wigington, and he was at Rhodes College before he went to Tennessee School, and his passion is development. And just in these few weeks that I've, started getting to know him, I'm excited about his direction and how he thinks of development. And so it's excellent. And, as a nonprofit, to be a 501c3, you always need to pass the support test. And for a while then, because we were pushing on the earned income and not on the fundraising, we were like, oh, this is getting close, but 33.33% minimum of your support needs to come from contributions. And then the rest can be from earned income. So for a while, especially after we reopened from the renovation, our earned income was huge, but hey, I say that's all the more reason to challenge the development team to, even raise more money. So that's just something I would make sure people think about.
Yes, development officers who help you raise the money to do all of this are really
absolutely important. They do. They need to raise it, and then one of the challenges, and I know a lot of organizations have it, is we all tend to fundraise locally or within your state, or so diversifying where your funding comes from is very, very important. So making sure your donors are excited about your mission, excited about what you're doing is very, very important as well.
Well, before we kind of move on to other topics, just kind of one last question about your day-to-day work. And you mentioned this a little bit, the various departments that are there at the National Civil Rights Museum. I don't know how many departments you have total, but what the fixed costs are that you have to be concerned about in the museum through those departments. What are the expenses of a museum that are kind of at the forefront of your thoughts on a day-to-day basis in the work you do?
Okay, just the fixed costs. Well, of course, it's just the standard, like your security costs are high. And, right now, this is a challenge. I think all across the nation, people have the challenge of the increased wages and low availability of staffing. So we are definitely being challenged currently from a security standpoint, housekeeping. Those are, standard fixed costs. We have utilities which are fixed. And so your basic operating costs. Then, of course, your staffing costs are really and truly a fixed. Well, they fluctuate, but they are a fixed cost unless you would not have staff anymore. So those are the line items to me that are always, top of mind. Definitely. And just to talk a little bit about what departments are here at the museum, we have our administrative department, which like our president's office and our finance department fall under. And we have our operations, which have some guest services. They have the security, housekeeping, facility management, that piece. IT is information technology is another department that we have. Then we have marketing and governmental affairs. We have our interpretation, collections, and education department. Then we actually have a new department that we started not that long ago, which is really to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as community engagement. Then we have our development department, my best friends, because they are our fundraisers and they can make my life hell or they can make my life quite comfortable because I don't have to worry about money. And then we also have our group sales and facility rentals department, and they book all our groups coming in. We do rent out some of our spaces here in the museum after hours and so on. Then we have our retail operations. Currently, we only have one of our two museum stores open, and that's a great revenue generator as well. Like I said, they have raised up, they have grossed up to a little over $2 million, but that is not the norm. And that's the gross, but once you factor out the cost of goods, that cost of goods is about maybe 40% of the gross. So they are a pretty strong revenue generator as well. I think, yeah, and just for our finance area, the areas of responsibility that I have when we have a president, because when we don't have a president, then I end up being the interim president until we find a president. So that's been another roller coaster in my career here at the museum, because for several different reasons, I think I've had to interim as president 3 times. And I'm so excited, like I said, because Russ started a couple weeks ago, and Terry, our former president, she left at the end of January. So we had, with COVID and everything else going on, we had a, challenging 7 months this year where we were operating without a president. So that's something that I end up doing. Then I'm also responsible for all things finance, so investments, all accounting, audits, all those different areas, accounts receivable, accounts payable, cash receipts, payroll, that whole section, as well as human resources. So staff recruitment, onboarding, all that good stuff that has to do with human resources. And of course, this last year and a half have been a challenge as well because of COVID, because everything is so dynamic in how you handle what goes on, but that whole HR area. And then also responsible for risk management, which is all insurance for the museum, whether it's our property insurance, workers' comp, just general insurance. We have cyber insurance as well. So just all that is under us. I have a great staff. I have Angela Faulkner in Human Resources, Reginald Sanders, my accountant, and Latoya Streeter, who is my accounting specialist, and we'll be filling one more position soon. But yes, so we keep all that going. I could go on and on. You can tell I am passionate. I enjoy my work.
I don't know how you do it all, T. It's really remarkable.
I enjoy what I do. I really do.
So a related question, but maybe a little bit of a different take on your day-to-day work. The Lorraine Motel, the National Civil Rights Museum, obviously the site of Dr. King's assassination in 1968, an incredibly important space in the context also not just of COVID, but of the last year of George Floyd, the civil rights protests all over the country. The work that you guys do there and where you are necessarily means that you're at the heart of some really intense conversations, important, controversial conversations in some regards to certain people, right? I'm wondering how that work informs what you do on the finance side of the Civil Rights Museum, and even in the last year as having to spend much of that as interim president, what that means for you.
So coming into this work at the National Civil Rights Museum, I was not a big history person. I know, I knew some of the history, not as much as I know now, but I tell you what, the National Civil Rights Museum is such a powerful place. I walk through the museum at least twice a week, and I learn something different every single time. I, read a different wall, and I learn, just different aspects of the civil rights movement. And what really gives me the excitement to come to work every day is talking to our different visitors and the impact the museum has on people who come through it. It's such a powerful, powerful place, that whole power of place. And just walking over there by, room 306, and, you can't even imagine, that Dr. King spent his last, hours on this earth right there. It gives me chills to this day. It's so important. It's such a change maker for America. And I do believe everybody should come to the museum. And so we were talking earlier about the endowment and wanting to make sure that we protect this place forever. And that's why I do what I do, because I feel like this museum is so important, not only for America, but for the world. And we have to keep it protected, be authentic in all the information that we have. so that people can, just understand and feel where we come from. But at the same time, we cannot leave it there. We need this place because, the National Civil Rights Museum does not belong to any one person or any group of people. It belongs to America. And because of that, you need to open those doors so that you can allow conversations from everybody. And, and my personal belief is you cannot just have people who think like you, who believe what you believe here. You need everybody to come together, have discussions here and see. And I have seen some personal changes in some different people's lives from a combination of being here at the museum and then witnessing what's happening in the world today. And you're exactly right. I talked to somebody who I have great respect for, who is a great supporter of the museum. But I don't know, and the person has been a great supporter for years, even before I ever got here. But when he sat there and watched George Floyd getting assassinated on national TV, it really did something. So he had like the basis of what all this is about. But it's one thing when you live in your own world. It's one thing to hear all these atrocities that are going on. It's a whole nother story when you actually see it happen. And so the combination of the museum and seeing George Floyd really created so much change in that one person, as well as in, oh my gosh, a lot of other people. So it's important. So you are right in asking me how it relates to what my job is. If I mess up on this job, or if I don't make sure that the museum is protected and that it is fiscally responsible and it is working for the best interests of the museum and the American people, then there's a problem. I have got to make sure, it's a huge responsibility. I have got to make sure that we protect these assets of the museum so that, 300 years from now, it will still be here, and people, it will be a different setup, but people will understand the importance of it and how far we have come. I hope I answered your question.
No, that's perfect. Also now thinking about your experience in history with the Association of African American Museums and your relationship to the organization today. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I've been on the board of the Association of African American Museums for, I think, about 8 years now. Yeah. And it is such an important organization because there is such a wide range of museums, African American museums in the United States. Some have, one part-time person. Others have, huge staff. And just to be able to put everybody on the same level playing field and offer staff development and offer resources for everybody is so important for our museum field. And so I am so grateful that I was able to become a part of it. It is, my favorite association, and the sky is the limit for it. And, really and truly, the staff, working there, and just, the financials, like if you look at how it has grown over the years, it's phenomenal. And I do believe that it is going to continue to be a place for all museums to get together and share resources and have dialogue and develop, help develop each other. And I think one of the great things that they can continue to do is to figure out, ways for museum professionals to get to know each other, because that's how you can become a great support system for each other, so that if somebody is, wanting some information about the endowment, or, when I have questions about policies and, all those different resources, we can call on the Association of African American Museums to say, hey, do you have a recommendation of who I can talk to, who is doing what I need to get into? And I appreciate the fact that it is very economically sound for all different, price ranges. It is for everybody. And so I am honored to be a part of it.
And I just want to be clear, your position on the board, you use your finance role. What do you do on the board?
I am treasurer on the board, yes.
So one related question to that, in the 8 years you've been on the board, how have you seen the finances of that organization change and evolve from then to now?
I have seen us definitely, I don't even know, 1,000% increase in revenue that I've seen. And then also, just setting up like an accounting system to make sure that we are accounting and that we can report on the finances of the association, because again, to me personally, fiscal responsibility is the one most important thing for me, because I never want anyone to question our financial situation. I believe in transparency and ensuring that information is, available for anybody who needs it. So absolutely, fiscal responsibility is very important.
You've also seen the organization be able to go from a volunteer-led organization to one with an executive director and staff.
Part-time staff. It is a blessing. It is. I really the board has been great, and then the leadership of Brian first, and then Lanisha, to really solidify and go out there as board members. These were volunteer board members who were able to secure the seed funding to have an executive director and staffing at the association. And, the board and everyone should definitely be commended for that. And I do understand that part of this is going to be used for museum classes. So what I do want to also just say, what I would say to different new professionals entering the field is volunteering and working with different associations and learning what they are doing can absolutely be change makers for different organizations. And that's what happened at AAAM, is that those volunteers had that vision and they started it, and then hired an executive director who they felt was passionate and aggressive enough to be able to continue that fundraising piece of it in order to keep the organization going. And I will be honest and say passion for the mission is very important, but besides the passion for the mission, you absolutely need to be able to raise those funds and be able to talk to people, raise those funds, and then be very judicious in managing those funds for the good of the mission of the organization. And that is exactly what I'm seeing at AAAM.
And just for the purposes of the record, you referenced Brian Carter, our immediate past president, and Lanisha DeBarta-Laban, who is our current president, as well as our original now executive director, although there was a point when the organization had an ED before, Vedette Coleman Robinson. And for some odd reason, it turns out, I don't know if we did this on purpose, that Lanisha DeBarta-Laban and Brian Carter are both in Seattle and working. So back-to-back presidents from the West Coast of the organization. But you're right, absolutely essential people. We're coming close to the end, and related to that, I'm wondering if you mentioned some people, who are the folks in this field that have impacted you the most?
Beverly Robertson was the former president of the National Civil Rights Museum. Has impacted me the most, because I will be honest and say, I don't know that 20 years ago I ever envisioned I will be in this place doing this type of work and absolutely enjoying it. And, you know, because you've got to realize working in corporate, you get stock options. The money is better, you know, some of the time the perks are great in corporate. And I don't know that when I first even came into the museum that I thought, you know, 15 years later, I would still be at the National Civil Rights Museum, because, you know, the corporate perks were great, but Beverly's excitement and her educating me on the museum, the teamwork that we had in order to build and renovate the museum, it absolutely made all the difference in the world, to where now I do not want to leave the museum. I am happy here. I have such passion for the mission. It's like, this is my baby. I want to protect it, and I want to just see it soar. So I would say Beverly Robertson had the greatest impact. There are so many people in the museum field who I've talked to, who I admire. Dr. Debbie Mack, I have great respect, because she's very, very strategic and has such passion for the museum field and the African American museums as well. And so she's somebody I greatly, greatly admire. There are a lot of people out there who are just amazing, And, you know, just being able, and I'm not going to name them all, but you know, working with the different like board members on the Association of African American Museums, that has really changed my life as well, because you get to hear the different perspectives from different people who definitely do not think like me, because, you know, I think of everything from a, you know, more financial standpoint, but hearing that mission for the museum field has been amazing. So there've been so many folks that have definitely impacted me and really cultivated my passion for the museum field.
And what's your vision for the future of the field?
The vision for the future is to see more African American museum professionals who are just changing the world. I continue. I mean, it's already happening, but seeing more activism within the museums and having museums recognized as change makers when it comes to social issues. That's very important to me. We are not static places. We are absolutely places where we can educate. We can be that, public square where people can have dialogue that can forever change and make this world a much better place, where people are not judged by the color of their skin, their accents, their, where they come from, but where we look at each person as just an individual who can help to make this world a much better place.
That's great. Thanks, T. Any closing comments or other recommendations for people who want to enter this work?
I would just strongly recommend, number one, keep recruiting great people for this work, as well as going to different other like business classes and so on, figuring out how you can infiltrate the nonprofit accounting class, the accounting 101, the human resources classes, the marketing classes, to educate them on what museums are, so that they realize that they can potentially work in a place where they can have multiple passions all being fed at the same time. So I would strongly recommend that, that your museum, that you just don't target museum professionals, but just target all different professionals, because it takes a lot of people to make a museum successful.
Thanks, T. I'm very grateful for your time and for your wisdom and for your collegiality and friendship. T. Jones, National Civil Rights Museum, and also I will note the biggest Memphis Grizzlies fan that I know.
Yeah, go Grizz. Well, thank you very much. It is such an honor to be able to do this interview with you. So I really appreciate the invitation, and just, because, this was, I did not really think this through a whole lot, but, you just refreshed me, because I'm able to, think back at, what I enjoy and why I'm so happy at the museum. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thanks, T. This was perfect.